Putin targets key infrastructure to make people suffer. An offensive is launched that could cause the Russian Federation to collapse. Death and destruction continue on both sides. This is how the war in Ukraine will likely go in 2023. It may be a new year, but Russia will not be turning over a new leaf. From the very beginning days of 2023, it's clear Vladimir Putin wants to cause as much pain and destruction as possible in Ukraine. As the winter months continue and the temperatures plummet in the region, Russia will relentlessly fire missiles and steer kamikaze drones into infrastructure of Ukraine. This tactic isn't being used to hurt the Ukrainian military, it's a cowardly act to create enough suffering amongst the Ukrainian people that more people flee its borders, causing a refugee crisis. Putin and his advisors know things are going very badly in Ukraine, and they're trying to reduce the amount of resistance they'll encounter in 2023 by any means possible. Like with their artillery strikes, Russia has no problem with targeting civilians or non-military targets. In fact, it seems that as 2023 continues, this will be a main part of the Russian strategy. Putin's forces have been destroying heat, power, and water sources throughout Ukraine to try to cause as much mayhem for regular people as possible. Even though this is a deplorable tactic, it's not especially surprising that it's the one Putin chose to use, as he's desperate to create any advantage he can for his forces. Each day that goes by, Vladimir Putin orders his military to strike more humanitarian targets along with any infrastructure vital to the survival of Ukrainian citizens. This will mean that civilians could freeze due to a lack of heat and electricity. And as terrible as this is, it'll likely be a strategy that Russia utilizes throughout 2023. That being said, the Ukrainian people are resilient. Aid from countries like the United States, the UK, Canada, and Germany will help the Ukrainians weather the harsh winter even as Russia engages in terrorist acts. Russian forces, on the other hand, might not be so lucky. As the winter of 2023 continues, it's not clear whether Russian troops are getting the supplies they need to make it through the freezing temperatures. It would be ironic, and not out of line with the way Russia has been conducting this war, if their own troops were demoralized during the frigid winter months, giving Ukrainian forces the upper hand in the coming offensives. Make no mistake, both sides are planning to launch offensives at some point in 2023. Ukraine is in a much better position to do this successfully, but there's little doubt that Russia is already planning for its next when winter gives way to spring. As of right now, it doesn't appear like Russia's in any position to launch an offensive during the winter months of 2023. Even as the ground freezes and vehicles can easily cross the landscape, the current Russian strategy seems to be entrench their troops and hold the line. In the closing months of 2022, Russia suffered a series of defeats that pushed its forces all the way back to where they were at the start of the war. This was a huge embarrassment for Putin, and he knew his forces would need to take defensive positions if they were going to be able to recover and advance during the next phase of the war. Russian troops dug trenches like in World War I, set up barricades along major roads, and blew up bridges that ran across the Dnipro River in southern Ukraine. For the beginning months of 2023, Russian forces are likely to stay in position to fend off any advances made by Ukraine. If the Ukrainian military does take advantage of the frozen landscape and launch their own offensive during the winter months, Russian forces will likely be pushed back further toward Crimea. However, the defensive lines they already built will make it hard for Ukraine to take back the southern region of their country for the time being. What we can expect from Russia is that their troops, tanks, and armored vehicles will take a brief hiatus in early 2023, while missiles and drones continue to rain down on Ukrainian targets. This will be done until more reinforcements and supplies are sent from Russia to strengthen their forces. As the new year begins, more and more Russian conscripts are being trained to replenish the ranks of lost men that Russia sustained in 2022. Until these new soldiers are ready for battle, Russia is stuck where it is. There are somewhere around 300,000 men in training in the pipeline, so we'll likely see an influx of Russian soldiers in Ukraine as 2023 progresses. Once the temperatures start to rise and spring is in full swing, Russia could launch an offensive to reclaim the territory it initially stole from Ukraine last year. This means that Russia will push across the Dnipro River and try to conquer the Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson oblasts. But this time, Ukraine will be ready. Although Russia amassed its forces on the border just before the invasion last year, it wasn't clear if Putin was crazy enough to start the war. Ukraine was preparing for the unthinkable, but NATO and the rest of the West thought Putin was just posturing. They made the mistake of thinking he would never invade a country with such close ties to the rest of Europe. In hindsight, we know that Vladimir Putin is truly a lunatic who believes he can do whatever he wants without repercussions. As 2023 continues, Vladimir Putin still likely thinks of himself as the most powerful man in the world. But Ukraine has shown that Russia isn't nearly as formidable as they look on paper. Their military uses outdated tactics, there is incompetence throughout the ranks, and corruption runs so deep that it gets in the way of basic military operations. Even when Russia launches its 2023 offensive, there's little guarantee it'll be successful. The obvious goal for Russia is to conquer all of Ukraine and incorporate it back into its borders. Even with an influx of hundreds of thousands of conscripts, this seems highly unlikely, but a Russian offensive in 2023 will likely go something like this. Vladimir Putin orders a bombardment of missiles, artillery, and drone strikes on a scale that's not been seen in months in Ukrainian targets across the Dnipro River. This will be the initial sign that the Russian offensive of 2023 has begun. An army of fresh but poorly trained troops begins their advance north. Throughout the winter, the Russians targeted Ukrainian infrastructure with their missiles and disrupted power in the region. However, this was not enough to cause a Ukrainian retreat, and the Russian forces immediately met heavy resistance. Ukrainian troops knew this day was coming. They stockpiled javelins and sniper rounds. As Russian soldiers cross the remaining bridges over the Dnipro, they're picked off by snipers. Cold War-era tanks are incapacitated or completely obliterated by the anti-tank missiles provided by the United States and Germany. The Russian offensive slows to a grinding halt. There's nowhere to run. They call in air support to aid in their retreat, but newly acquired National Advanced Surface-to-Air Missile Systems sent by the United States blows the Russian planes out of the sky. At the same time that Russian forces in the south launch their offensive, another force from Belarus tries to invade from the north. This will be an even bigger failure than the first time around. When forces were moved across the border from Belarus in the initial invasion, Ukrainian forces were not prepared to fight a war, and they still ended up defeating the enemy. On top of that, the initial invasion force consisted of the best men and equipment Russia had to offer, which is not what they'll be fighting with in 2023. Now Ukraine is battle-hardened and its troops have experience. Any enemy force that tries to approach Kyiv from Belarus will be quickly dealt with, and the losses would be catastrophic for Russia and its allies. Although it is possible that instead of sending another invasion force across the border in the north, Russia might just amass a large number of troops in Belarus as a distraction to split Ukrainian forces. Russian planning during the war has left a lot to be desired, so this might be a bit too complicated for them to figure out. However, a buildup of forces to their north would at least cause Ukraine to keep an eye on what was happening there. Regardless of the tactics used by Russia during their offensive, it seems highly unlikely they'll succeed in any of their objectives. It's almost completely impossible that a single Russian offensive would win the war, so 2023 will likely not be a year of victory, especially for Russia. That being said, there is one option that Putin has put on the table but not used yet, and if he does, 2023 could be the year the world ends. If Russia launches an offensive and it becomes a complete failure, Ukraine will launch a counteroffensive to make Russia pay for its misstep. If done successfully, Ukraine could push Russian forces all the way back to Crimea. And if it looked to Putin as if Crimea would be lost, he would not hesitate to use every weapon at his disposal. If Russia loses Crimea, it could be the end for Putin. He's put everything on the line by invading Ukraine, and there would be no way to spin a victory if Russia lost control of Crimea. Therefore, if a Ukrainian offensive or counteroffensive threatens his rule, Putin may unleash tactical nukes to obliterate forces. This would prompt a response from NATO, and Putin being Putin, things could escalate even further if he decides to launch strategic nukes. This would lead to World War III and the end of the world as we know it. The scenario is very unlikely to happen in 2023, but most nations around the world thought it was unlikely that Putin would invade Ukraine, yet here we are. If Ukraine is the first to strike in 2023, it'll likely do so when the ground is completely frozen in the middle of the winter. Russian forces have focused their defenses in the western portion of the Kherson Oblast. However, their eastern flank is somewhat exposed, with vast amounts of land between one defensive position and the next. If a Ukrainian offensive was launched across the Dnipro River into the northeastern section of the Zaporizhia Oblast, they could encircle Russian forces and cause massive casualties. As it stands now, the early Russian defenses of 2023 are not very good. Ukraine may be planning to take advantage of this and gain a foothold in the southern bank of the Dnipro, which would then allow them to push further south toward Crimea. Ukraine also might try to drive Russian forces out of the Donbas region from the north. Clearing Russia out of their country entirely is their main goal, but 2023 will most likely consist of a series of offensives by Ukraine to slowly take back their territory. Even though the Ukrainian military has shown time and time again that they can outmaneuver and defeat Russian forces, they still will need to be strategic as Russia still has them outnumbered. Successful Ukrainian offensives will almost certainly occur during 2023, but a decisive victory and the removal of Russian troops from their borders might not come until later in the year, if at all. The only way Ukraine will succeed in launching an offensive is if they get the weapons and supplies they need from the West. At the beginning of the war, Russia banked on the Ukrainian people basically giving up without a fight. Putin honestly thought this would happen due to bad intel, but also because he's a psychopath who thinks no one would have the gall to stand up to him. When this initial invasion failed to take Kyiv and quickly end the war, Putin believed that if he could cause enough damage and take out Ukraine's infrastructure, eventually Western aid would dry up, and his forces would be able to deal with what was left of the Ukrainian military. This has not happened yet. What is happening is that Western nations are being slow to provide Ukraine with the weapons and supplies they need to win the war. Ukraine has beaten the odds in every way possible, and all they're asking for is a little more help from the West to finish the job. Countries in NATO, like the United States and Germany, France, and the UK, are all still sending aid. It just isn't happening quickly enough. This is one of the things that Russia will try to exploit in 2023. If Putin can strengthen his troop numbers by training hundreds of thousands of conscripts along with supplying them with the weapons they need before Ukraine gets resources from the West, Russia might be able to overpower the Ukrainian military. This is exactly what Putin is now hoping for as 2023 gives way to the next phase of the war. By disrupting the infrastructure of Ukraine and finding ways to prevent supplies from reaching the front lines, Russia can buy time until it can replenish its forces. So 2023 is becoming a race against time. Can Russia cause enough damage to make it until spring when they can launch their own offensive? Or will Ukraine secure the supplies they need to strike in the coming months? Only time will tell. It's interesting to note that Russia believed the West would not help Ukraine at the beginning of the war. And as the war became drawn out, Putin assumed the Western nations would lose interest in what was happening in Ukraine, which there has been a precedence for in the past when he annexed Crimea in 2014. Surprisingly, Western countries have continually backed Ukraine, with the United States being one of the biggest suppliers of weapons and resources. The US is a key player here because other nations are looking to see how far the superpower is willing to go to stand up to Russia. There's a delicate balancing act that's happening, with the aid being given to Ukraine. Western nations have refused to send long-range missiles for fear they could escalate things further if launched into Russia. This is a valid concern, but Ukraine has made it clear that even though long-range missiles would make a huge difference in their war effort, they're not required for a victory. What is required are anti-tank weapons and surface-to-air missiles. Putin's war plan for 2023 hinges on these continuing to be weak points in the Ukrainian military. If Russia can continuously bomb, launch missiles, and use kamikaze drones to disrupt infrastructure as well as target military installations, Ukraine could be in big trouble. The main thing is that even though many nations have put sanctions on Russia to cripple its economy, which has been successful, Putin still has the resources and manpower he needs to make more weapons. And even though Russia's economy has nosedived into the ground, it's still selling massive amounts of oil and natural gas to China, India, and the European Union. This means there is still cash flowing into the country, which is pretty much all controlled by Putin. There are also foreign companies and governments that are willing to sell Russia weapons, similar to how the West is supplying Ukraine. So even though Russia is running low on things like missiles, it can still buy or make more, and it can probably do this much faster than Western countries are resupplying the Ukrainian military. 2023 will be a race for Russia to rearm its troops before Ukraine can do the same. In the coming months, whoever launches an offensive first will set the tone for the rest of the year. If Ukraine is able to break through the Russian defenses and head toward Crimea, the rest of the year will likely be a series of staggering defeats for Russia. However, if Russian forces can make it through winter and have their numbers replenished by all of the newly trained conscripts, they might have the numbers to take back some territory lost as 2022 came to an end. The saddest part of it all is that there is little to no talk of peace in 2023. Putin won't come to the negotiating table, and Ukraine has made it clear they will agree to nothing less than Russia surrendering all of the territory it stole from them, including Crimea. Neither side is going to agree to the other's terms, so peace talks will not be something to expect in 2023. However, if things continue to go poorly for Putin, it might cause something to happen within Russia that no one thought possible. Vladimir Putin has put numerous countermeasures in place to ensure no one can take his power. He has an internal military force whose sole job is to squash uprisings and protests. Putin has also separated power in the government to ensure no one group can gain enough support to start a coup. Nonetheless, the Russian people are suffering. Citizens are being conscripted for a war they're losing faith in, and huge numbers of people are fleeing the country to escape the oppressive Russian regime. 2023 might be the year that the Russian people have had enough and that Putin's power becomes weak enough for them to do something about it. There is pain and suffering in the country, and with every military defeat in Ukraine, Putin has to spin a new narrative to make it look like everything's going according to plan. Even with state-controlled media, this is becoming harder and harder to do. At some point, things will become so bad that there will be no way for Putin to lie about the reality of the situation. As it stands now, Ukraine seems to be in a better position militarily than Russia is in 2023. We can expect Putin to continue his war as he is in too deep to do anything else. He can't pull out of Ukraine without looking weak and losing faith of the Russian people. Therefore, 2023 will be about digging in and holding the line for Russia, while missiles and drones are used to disrupt the infrastructure of Ukraine. If this continues long enough and Russia succeeds in disrupting power, heat, and water to Ukrainian citizens, they'll have to flee their homes. 2023 could end up with one of the largest refugee crises in recent years. However, if Ukraine is able to launch a successful offensive, take back the southern regions of their country, and oust Russian forces from Crimea, 2023 could very well be the year that Vladimir Putin loses power. That being said, most military analysts agree that 2023 will likely be similar to what we saw in 2022. Soldiers and civilians will die, the destruction of towns and cities will continue, and the Ukrainian people will continue to bravely fight an enemy that is much larger than they are. Let's just all hope that Vladimir Putin doesn't decide to take drastic actions that lead to 2023 being the year Russia starts World War III. Now watch This Is How the Russian War in Ukraine Ends, or check out AWOL Russian soldiers are destroying Putin's war in Ukraine plans.